When the girl was working in her family's shop, the village chief brushed her hand on purpose while taking his mail. What seemed like a small gesture made the girl deeply uneasy. Just then, Donalda's father walked over. Because the villagers were generally poor, the goods could not be sold. Money was tight, so he wanted the village chief to offer some solution, but the village chief didn't care at all and said everything just needed patience. Yet the truth was not that simple. Donalda's father's shop was on the brink of bankruptcy. In desperation, he found a respected guarantor and went straight to the town bank to request a loan. But after reading his documents, the bank manager vaguely rejected him on the spot. Even having a reputable pastor as guarantor made no difference. Unable to provide any financial support, the manager sent them away. He then tossed the submitted documents into the furnace. But what was even more shocking was that when the manager opened the back room, the village chief was sitting inside. Clearly, the two shared some secret arrangement. Meanwhile, the pure and lovely Donalda often went to visit Alexis, the caretaker of the cemetery. They had grown up as childhood sweethearts. Both dreamed of one day entering marriage and kept the beautiful wish quietly in their hearts. But things soon took a drastic turn. Restaurants in the village that could no longer handle the financial pressure began moving away one after another. Donalda could only stand aside and watch. She wondered whether her own father, who was about to lose everything, would soon face the same fate. But he still wanted one more chance. So he went again to see the village chief, hoping that perhaps only Seraphine could save him. Then, in his home, he repeated all his difficulties. Knowing that the village chief was closely connected to the bank manager, he begged him to help mediate. At first, the village chief pretended to show sympathy and kindness with a fake smile, but soon he shifted the topic to Donalda.
Je pourrais peut-être t'aider. Ça me ferait gros de peine de te laisser dans le trou, mais ta Donalda, elle a raison, je fais tout mon possible pour l'épargner. Une belle créature de même. Tu seras pas toujours là pour la protéger. Parce que ça y prendrait un vrai bon parti.
The father immediately understood what he meant, but the village chief was 30 years older than his daughter. How could Donalda possibly agree? So the father spoke seriously to Donalda and told her about the help the village chief had offered. At first Donalda was happy, thinking she and her father were finally going to overcome their hardship. But when she heard that the village chief wanted to marry her, the smile instantly disappeared from her face. The man was not only far too old, he was also known for being extremely stingy. Most importantly, her heart already belonged to someone else. She took this chance to tell her father about the boy she loved.
Un grand rêveur, un pharaon. Voyons donc, ma pauvre fille, tu y penses pas, il pourra jamais faire vivre.
Je peux pas parler de même, vous le connaissez mal. Il a changé.
Mais ce que je vois, c'est que c'est ma petite fille qui a bien changé.
She never expected her father to hold such harsh stereotypes about Alexis. In truth, the main reason was that he disliked Alexis for being poor, so he refused to let his daughter be with him. When Donalda asked if he would force her to marry the village chief, the old man fell into conflict. He didn't want his daughter to enter a loveless marriage, yet he also couldn't face the harsh reality. If he had any other way out, he wouldn't have sunk so low as to offer his daughter. In fact, he was trying to figure out how to persuade her. So Donalda went to the pastor, explained everything and asked for advice. But what could the pastor do? He simply told her to follow her heart. And Donalda, even if it meant arguing with her father, would not marry that aging man. But was that really the case? Since harsh persuasion didn't work, her father tried emotional pressure. When Donalda returned home, he pretended to hang himself. Seeing the critical situation, the girl rushed to cut the rope and saved her father at the last moment. This was a deeply selfish father. He was willing to sacrifice his daughter's future happiness to protect his own interests. He forced things to a point where she had no room to refuse.
Arrêtez de vous tourmenter.
The poor girl, unable to defy her father, went to her late mother's grave in tears. Perhaps this was fate. In a society steeped in patriarchal values, Donalda had no choice but to accept reality. Before the marriage, the village chief locked all his saved money in a sealed room. Was he afraid that his future wife might take any of it? His obsessive caution was astonishing, raising fear for what Donalda might face after moving in. Soon the wedding day arrived. On what should have been a celebratory day, he should have worn respectable clothing, but when he looked at his shoes, he hesitated. He couldn't let people think he was wealthy, so he needed to appear frugal, to maintain his image. So at the ceremony, He deliberately wore shoes covered in mud. As for the bride, she wore a white dress, but her face had no trace of a smile. Then the pastor proceeded with the formal steps. The wedding resembled a funeral, and no one smiled. Yet no one dared say a word of discontent. Crossing the village chief would bring nothing but trouble, and the girl's unfortunate marriage was about to begin. On this stormy night, her husband didn't even light the stove. Before she could step into the bedroom, he unbuttoned her clothes, and at the dining table he completed what he felt entitled to. Life turned bitter. Donalda never would have imagined that the so-called leader of the village lived in such a small wooden hut. However, this is only the beginning of a tragic marriage. On the other side, the girl's vigil keeper boyfriend is still writing letters to Donalda. He hopes the bitter winter will pass quickly, believing that once the warm spring arrives, he will immediately return to the village to find her. What he does not know is that the woman he loves has already gotten married. Meanwhile, Donalda lives in deep poverty every single day. There is not even rice or butter at home, and her husband is unwilling to spend money to buy any. He only makes mousetraps and survives by hunting, pushing stinginess to its absolute extreme.
Je pauvre comme du sel, Donalda. Je dois continuer à gratter où c'est qu'on peut, puis laisser faire. C'est parfait.
Yet the wife still goes against her husband's wishes and returns to the village alone to look for food. When she arrives at her old home, the neighbor woman tells her that the village mayor is actually very wealthy, but extremely tight-fisted. Donalda has heard this before, but she never imagined he would be so cruel even to himself, let alone to her, a newly married wife. At this moment, the girl's father walks over and hands his daughter a jar of jam. When he admits that the family is making sugar pancakes and plans to bring some to her in the afternoon, Donalda says that her husband does not like visitors. The father seems to realize something at that moment, understanding that he has personally buried his daughter's youth. After the man leaves, the neighbor woman takes out several letters, all love letters written by Alexis to Donalda. She cannot bear to burn them, so she hands them to her personally. Those youthful vows of love have now become unforgettable memories. Seeing how the words are still filled with affection feels as if her heart is being torn apart inch by inch. Donalda feels both ashamed and hopeless, painfully realizing that her life can no longer turn back. She hates her own weakness, hates the cruelty of fate, and hates that this love, already crushed by reality, still stubbornly lives on in her heart. Around noon, when the girl returns home with the items she bought, her husband is standing at the door cleaning the game he has just hunted. At the same time, he angrily scolds his wife.
Je savais que t'étais morte. Ça a bien été long. T'as acheté d'autres choses que de la fleur?
Mon père me l'a vendu pour moins cher. Avec la différence, je vais faire avoir un petit morceau de bœuf.
Viande de chien. J'avais dit qu'on n'en voulait pas.
Mais moi, j'aime ça.
Quand je pense qu'il te restait de l'argent, comment c'est qu'on va faire pour la vie? Si tu fais rien de gaspiller de même. Puis dans mon dos à part de ça.
Je suis pas coupable de rien.
Dis, ma fille, comment ça m'a coûté de sortir ton père tout tard?
She is powerless to argue back and can only run back to her room in pain. Meanwhile, the vigil keeper Alexis finally returns. He excitedly asks the children by the roadside about Donalda. When he hears that the woman he loves has already married someone else, he thinks they are joking with him, but when they say she married Mayor Seraphine, Alexis's beautiful dreams instantly turn to ashes, and he stands there in a daze as if his soul has been pulled away. Determined to uncover the truth, the man goes to Donalda's father's shop to ask about it, but the other man shows no patience at all. A penniless man has no right to talk about his daughter. Besides, she is already married, and there is no need to worry about so-called love anymore.
Toi qui oses me parler d'amour, Alexis Labranche.
Ben, tu sauras que même s'il y avait pour marier Séraphin, jamais je te l'aurais donné.
Vous l'avez pas donné.
Vous l'avez vendu.
On the other side, Donalda works tirelessly for the household every day. While mopping the floor, she suddenly feels a sharp pain in her abdomen, and she is already pregnant at this point. However, because of her husband's stinginess and cruelty, she is not allowed to eat properly, leading to long-term malnutrition, and her body gradually begins to show signs of bleeding. She even presses blood-stained cloth under a stone to prevent her naturally suspicious husband from discovering it. This is because the child in her womb existed before the marriage, and the father of the child is Alexis. But at present, it is unlikely that the unborn baby will survive. Just like that, 3 days pass, dark clouds fill the sky, and a torrential rain begins to fall. Inside the house, Seraphine clearly does not notice that Donalda, who is about to enter, is suddenly stopped by Alexis. This young man is incredibly bold, daring to come to the house and take another man's wife away. The two then head into the dense forest, where all the sorrow speaks without words.
Je sais que t'es bien enceinte. Nanette me l'a dit. Le mariage, c'était pour sauver ton père. Dis-moi là que c'est vrai. Pourquoi tu parles pas? Dis quelque chose, Donaldo, n'importe quoi.
T'es là, Alexis. T'es là.
Je t'emmène. On s'en va loin d'ici. Personne ne va jamais pouvoir nous retrouver.
Tu sais que c'est impossible.
Mais tu peux pas retourner.
Tu savais comme ça me déchirer en dedans de moi.
Tu peux pas sacrifier toute ta vie pour ton père, Donaldo. Réveille-toi, s'il vous plaît, réveille-toi!
Mais je suis réveillée, Alexis. Si je rêvais, j'aurais pas si mal.
No dream could ever hurt this deeply, such heartbreaking words. Perhaps lovers finally ending up together only exists in fairy tales. Meanwhile, Seraphine still lived on plain meals, and it made one wonder whether such a pitiful man could truly exist. He clearly had money, yet deliberately pretended to live in poverty, a hypocrite hiding behind a false image. At the same time, the husband began to suspect his wife and questioned her about why she stayed in the forest for so long.
Qu'est-ce que tu faisais dans le bois? Appris maintenant.
Rien.
Me joues-tu dans le dos?
Je te jure, Séraphin. J'ai rien fait de mal.
He seemed to sense something. Since Donalda's past with Alexis was known to everyone, it was easy for the husband to connect the dots. 2 more months passed. Heartbroken, Alexis returned to the lumber camp and focused on work, trying his best not to let love torment him. But his colleague, who had a disability, saw him pushing himself this hard and advised him to forget Donalda. He told him not to harm his own health because of a woman. Their conversation was overheard by the village chief, who happened to be on the mountain hunting. Clearly, the man still had unresolved feelings with his wife. A surge of anger instantly rose in the village chief's chest. Meanwhile, Alexis wanted to use a horse to drag the timber, but the rugged mountain path made it impossible. His colleague saw that he was acting out of frustration. Then an accident struck. While transporting the wood, Alexis whipped the horse too hard, startling it and causing the rope to snap, which whipped back onto his leg. The frightened horse bolted wildly, and Alexis's leg was severely injured. As the horse raced through the forest, the pole dragging behind it got caught on an obstacle, tightening around its neck and causing it to fall heavily to the ground. The strong creature struggled desperately, but the trapped pole held it too tightly. Again and again it tried to rise, only to fall. Its strength faded rapidly. At last, the exhausted horse collapsed completely and could no longer stand. Near dusk, Alexis dragged his injured leg to the side of the dying animal, the tragic result of his own reckless actions. After quietly apologizing to the companion he loved dearly, he pulled the trigger to end the creature's suffering. The gunshot echoing in the forest caught the attention of his former lover, filling her with fear. As expected, her husband, who was out hunting, arrived at Alexis's side just moments later and saw the heartbreaking scene. The two were already rivals in love. The older man had taken the woman Alexis loved. Now he intended to report Alexis to the council, and the weight of past and present grudges became unbearable. Alexis could have ended it all from behind with one shot, yet he fired into the air, trying instead to release his rage with his fists. This was the pain of losing the woman he loved. He had missed the best chance for revenge, and the two men quickly fell into a violent struggle. Though older, the village chief was still physically strong, so he was not at a disadvantage, and with Alexis's leg already injured, he put aside any remaining mercy. Because he was the village chief, and because his wife had always loved this other man, he could not swallow the anger burning in his chest and was determined to make Alexis pay. He grabbed a stone from the ground, swearing to end Alexis once and for all. Fortunately, Alexis's injured leg still had some strength left to resist, but only barely. After a fierce struggle, both men were too exhausted to continue fighting. As the morning sun broke through the clouds, the wife waiting at home sensed something was wrong. Her husband had not returned all night, and she had heard gunshots in the forest, so she went out to search. To her shock, she found her husband lying in the barn, his face covered in blood. She knew he must have fought with Alexis, though she didn't understand why he would do this. Even if she stayed by his side, he could never keep her heart, because she and Alexis loved each other, and that truth could never be erased. So the wife went against her husband's wishes and slipped into the depths of the forest to see the injured Alexis. She wanted the man she loved to leave this place as far as possible, because if this continued, both sides would only suffer more pain. It was the final moment when two broken hearts drew close again in despair. They loved each other deeply, yet fate tore them apart, leaving them to say goodbye silently in the stillness of the woods.
Va-t'en loin. Pour moi.
Ça me fait rien de souffrir à cause de toi. Si je te quitte, faire pour vivre sans la douleur?
Je sais pas! Je sais pas! S'il te plaît, va-t'en! Alexis, va-t'en loin!
Longing, heartbreak, regret, and helplessness all churned inside those few early morning moments. Meanwhile, even the stingy village chief was tormented by his feelings. He ran into a merchant delivering goods. The man told him that everyone in the village supported Alexis. This only further ignited the chief's anger. Back home, Seraphine questioned his wife, demanding to know where she had gone. Had she gone to see her old lover again? This time, Donalda did not hide anything. She confessed that she loved Alexis deeply and that he was the only man in her heart. But she also said she had persuaded Alexis to leave, so that sadness would not destroy the family even more. Though she had lost love, she still had responsibilities and would try to be a proper wife. Her husband did not lose his temper at these words. After all, he had been the one to break apart these doomed lovers. Yet as he walked back inside, he muttered that gratitude did not exist. Stingy, hypocritical, selfish, these words described him far better than any title. Autumn arrived, and without Alexis, Donalda felt like her soul had been taken away. Sometimes she even blamed herself. She hated that she let Alexis go, hated that she obeyed so easily. When the leaves turned red, the girl felt lost, as if wandering alone in a moonless forest. On this day, the village was shaken by the arrival of a guest from far away. It was the village chief's sister, who had been gone from Quebec for many years. She had come to claim her share of the inheritance, and she had even brought a lawyer. The siblings had fallen out years ago and she had left for America. Now she wanted back what belonged to her. As the lawyer read the statement, the siblings looked at each other with no trace of affection, only deep hatred. When the compensation amount was announced, the village chief accepted it readily.
L'argent est arrivé. Seulement, ça va prendre du temps pour le ramasser.
Votre sœur Delima vous accorde 24 heures. Faute de quoi, j'ai reçu l'instruction de faire procéder à la saisie de votre terre.
24 heures, pas une minute de plus.
How could he, who always pretended to be poor, suddenly produce such a sum? His wife tried to ask for leniency, saying her husband had lent his money to those in need, but his sister thought she was naive. She said the wife didn't understand her own husband at all, then left in her carriage. Sure enough, the next day Seraphine paid his sister every cent without delay. Though the sum meant little to her, it left Seraphine drenched in sweat. Meanwhile, Donalda continued to worry endlessly for her husband, but when she opened the storage room upstairs, she was stunned. Inside hung precious hides, and coins were scattered everywhere. She finally realized the truth. Her husband's poverty had always been an act. He had treated her harshly on purpose, but by the time she understood, it was far too late. The poor girl's fate had been destroyed by her father's choices. Her husband even ran a coffin business. When villagers wanted to buy one, the large ones were too big and expensive, while the small ones were too small to lie in. One grieving man begged the chief to lower the price of the big one, but Seraphine's stinginess would allow no compromise. Hearing their conversation, Donalda rushed out and pleaded with her husband to make a proper-sized coffin.
Oh mon Dieu, Séraphin faisait un autre cercueil. L'argent, t'en as. J'en veux plus de te voir tirer sa misère du monde.
Ah, toi, tu m'empêches de monter.
Je me tasserai pas! Tu vas y faire un nouveau cercueil. Je te dis que je me tasserai plus. Je vais finir par tailler.
Her kindness meant nothing to him, and sympathy was something this miserly man never possessed. So at the sorrowful funeral, the boy who had lost his life could only curl up inside a coffin that didn't fit. Winter returned once more. Donalda tried to return to the forest cabin to see whether the man she loved had come back. To her shock, Alexis really was there. Longing was a bitter tea, and their reunion filled them both with emotion, but it was only a dream. After her husband's harsh treatment, the girl's body had grown fragile. Combined with the bitter cold, she fell ill, coughing non-stop even in the solemn church. In the church, everyone else was singing Christmas hymns, yet she kept coughing non-stop, disrupting the atmosphere. Her husband glanced at her from the corner of his eye but asked nothing. As Donalda's coughing grew worse, she had no choice but to leave the lively crowd. Her father also noticed she was unwell, but he offered no real help. So Donalda walked out of the noisy church, enduring illness while also feeling the cold indifference of the world. Through the swirling snow, she returned alone to the small wooden house. When her husband came home later that night, he found his wife trembling, curled up in bed, drifting in and out of consciousness. This was the result of his own cruelty, long-term malnutrition, living in an unheated home, and the fever that finally overwhelmed her. Even with her body so fragile, he did not immediately seek a doctor. Instead, he called a few village women and tried using crude folk remedies to ease her suffering. They lowered her into warm water, hoping it would warm her frozen body and restore her strength. One woman asked why they hadn't gone for a doctor. Everyone understood the truth. In this home dominated by stinginess and neglect, death seemed kinder than her daily suffering. Her beloved had gone far away, and hope had faded. The next day, the storm grew worse. Her husband crept upstairs to check on her. The women had stayed with her, even improving her meals to give her some nourishment. One woman's husband had already contacted the nearest doctor, but the snow had sealed the roads, meaning the earliest he could arrive would be the next evening, and everyone knew Donalda still thought of Alexis. So that woman's husband defied his wife's objections and set out to find Alexis in a distant town. He feared that if something happened to Donalda, she might never see the man she loved again. Seraphine listened from outside, his cold indifference suffocating. He refused to help, refused to spend money, yet still clung to his vanity, even peeking through the door to spy on the women inside. His shamelessness knew no bounds. Meanwhile, the man sent to find Alexis pushed through the brutal winter and finally began the return journey with him, but the snow reached their waists, blocking the road entirely. Even a sled could not move. Still, Alexis could think of nothing but reaching Donalda, but her condition was worsening rapidly. Even the village pastor came. Her father was there too. Everyone gathered around her bed, praying for a miracle. Then a woman near the window noticed horses crying out in the storm. No one could believe it, but Alexis had truly come despite the deadly weather. Perhaps this was the power of devotion. No hardship could outweigh the life of the one he loved. But her husband could not allow her to see him. Even her father could not bear it anymore and forcefully stopped the village chief. Yet it was too late for regret. Because of the storm, the doctor never arrived. And so, in her final moments, Alexis saw her one last time. All the years of pain melted into tears slipping from the corner of Donalda's eyes. She wished for another life, a world without chains or money, where she could walk beside the man she loved as she had in her youth, carefree and unburdened. But time had run out. Donalda slowly closed her eyes. Only Alexis's quiet sobbing echoed in the still room, while outside the storm roared as if the whole world were mourning this love that came too late. At the morning funeral, the villagers gathered to bid farewell. Some women lamented the unfairness of fate and even blamed themselves for staying silent. They knew Donalda had suffered in her marriage, struggling under her husband's shadow, yet no one had reached out a hand. Guilt filled every heart. Meanwhile, as the funeral took place, the village chief's house was quietly set ablaze. When Seraphine saw the smoke rising in the distance, he sensed disaster. He rushed away from the funeral, racing toward his burning home, because it held all his wealth. By the time he arrived, the flames were already roaring. Still, he charged inside. The villagers who set the fire watched from a distance, feeling a grim sense of justice, but to everyone's shock, when others arrived moments later and heard screams inside, it was Alexis who ran into the burning house. After a long struggle, he dragged the dying Seraphine out, though the man did not survive. In his hand, the miser clutched gold coins and a knife engraved with his name. Who would have imagined that in such a remote mountain village, someone hoarded gold coins in secret? In the end, Seraphine's cruelty destroyed his wife, and his greed destroyed himself. Thus the story comes to a close. The film is adapted from Quebec novelist Claude's work The Red Angel. Stone Heart, also known as Seraphine, Heart of Stone, it is a rural tragedy about greed and human nature, with stark imagery. The film shows how money corrodes the heart and steals tenderness. Seraphine's obsession with wealth consumed everything. He treated Donalda not as a person, but as a bargaining chip stolen from her father. After marriage, he tormented her with extreme frugality and coldness. Even in her final illness, he refused to buy medicine or seek help. Donalda died in loneliness and despair, a sacrifice at the altar of his greed. The most poignant part of the film is Alexis's enduring love. He could not save her from fate, but he never abandoned his devotion. Through his sorrowful yet steadfast eyes, the film reveals a glimmer of warmth in a world crushed by money and desire. Alexis becomes the last remaining conscience in a village numbed by self-interest. In the end, the village chief perished clutching his gold, consumed by the very flames of greed. Alexis watched in silence, his gaze filled with sorrow. This is not just the tale of a miser, it is a profound parable about human nature. When greed possesses the heart, love and compassion vanish like smoke in a burning sky.
If you want more movie explainers like this, comment the next movie name. And subscribe to K.Movie.E at K.Movie.E for more. Please visit to our Instagram and Facebook page. Thank you so much for watching till the end.